Hi, and welcome to the channel. I'm JJ Atkins, and this is JJ Atkins Art. I run a digital art channel focusing mostly on pop culture illustrations done with Procreate and an iPad. This particular illustration we're taking a look at today is inspired by Six Fan Arts, a challenge that's going on with Instagram right now. As you can see here, the gist of it is that you post a blank set of 6 boxes and some fans suggest some fan art for you to draw. This is number 5 of 6, WALL-E. Now, before we get into the drawing itself, I just want to take a moment and mention something a little bit personal. This is my 99th video, which means the next one is going to be my 100th posting, and I thought maybe it was due for a little bit of a celebration and maybe even a little bit of free art giveaway. Yes, I said it, free art. So here's the deal. I'm trying to get to 100 subscribers and get it to as quickly as possible. I'm sitting roughly around that 67 mark right now, so I need a big push to get to that number 100 to celebrate the 100th video. So please, do me a favor, click the subscribe button. And if you're one of the new subscribers that get into my channel here and help me get to that 100, I'm going to be giving away some free art. I'm going to give away 10 free pieces of art, something that I've already posted to my channel, just kind of randomly to any of the new subscribers that come in. I'll put some more description and some kind of rules, so to speak, in the description below, so check them out. And again, don't forget to click that on that subscribe button, and I'll be announcing some winners with some free art pretty soon. Okay, now that being said, let's go ahead and take a look at the art. So the first thing that might bear mentioning here is that this is a little bit of a departure for me. WALL-E is not a human, and human beings are what I tend to focus on when I do a lot of my art, mostly in caricature, but sometimes outside just that. The human being and the anatomy is generally what kind of fascinates me and is fun for me to draw. So again, WALL-E here. By the way, I'm a huge fan of the film. It's one of my favorites. But WALL-E was a really kind of different art exercise here when it comes to laying out basic shapes. And you can kind of see I took a different approach to it than I would if I was drawing some sort of a human form. In human form, I'm trying to kind of start with basic anatomy and build shapes off that. But with WALL-E, it was almost like I was assembling the robot myself, starting with a square and putting in some of the rough shapes of where all the panels were on that body. Then it became a matter of just kind of building up body parts out of shapes like rectangles and squares and cubes, and then slowly kind of assembling them as I drew them. And I worked on a lot of layers when I did this. So the body is one layer, and then you have that hand as one layer, and this kind of eye piece that I'm drawing right now is its own layer. But the point is that it's almost like I built it as if WALL-E was being assembled in real life by assembling a series of parts one at a time to make up the body as a whole. And it wasn't something that I kind of walked into intending to do it that way. It's just organically how I ended up drawing it. And for some reason, it seemed to kind of mimic the the whole essence of the character, that he is robotic and a lot of sharp lines and angles and boxes really kind of make up his shape. I really feel like if we're going to comment to the movie for just a second, that's a really interesting juxtaposition to kind of think about WALL-E as essentially a cube, little more than just a cube, and then you take the Eve character that he gets paired with a little bit later in the movie. Spoilers, by the way. And Eve is largely curved, egg-shaped, the complete antithesis of what we see in the shape of WALL-E. So maybe sometime later on I'll try to do maybe an Eve drawing, but WALL-E really kind of captured my imagination because with humans you tend to draw a lot of curves, and this was a lot of straight lines and angles and really a lot of precision. And that's what I felt was really interesting about this. I got really consumed with the detail. And I think you'll see some evidence of that when we get to the kind of final version of this and the coloring and some of the touch-up work that needed to be done. But if we're focusing on just the drawing, just for a moment here, a lot of the details still had to kind of come through in the line drawing. And what I mean by that is really just little things like, well, the treads, for instance, on his lower body there. Those treads were something I kind of struggled with a lot when I started getting into the final line work phase because I wanted to get the angle and the perspective just right. It had to match up with the perspective of the cube that is essentially his body. So there had to be some slight foreshortening, and we're matching up triangles against squares, so getting that lined up just right proved to be a little bit of a challenge. In terms of other detail work, the fingers. He doesn't have fingers, but if we loosely call them phalanges or fingers, you don't see it yet in kind of the rough sketch, but a little bit later on when I get into the fine line detail, I'm going to put little hinges. And that was really kind of a fascinating thing for me because as I started kind of building up the drawing here, I used reference photos from the movie to help me out with some of the, getting some of the accuracy of the parts right. And what I started figuring out here is that whoever designed this character did an enormous amount of research, maybe, or at the very least, an enormous amount of time spent making sure that every little element of Wally makes sense to the environment that he is in. So let's just kind of review for a second from the movie. In the movie, he's in this kind of post-apocalyptic version of Earth where all the human beings are gone, and he is a trash compactor. That's kind of his name, Wally. Waste allocation load lifter Earth class. He's the last of his kind. He's been there for a really, really long time. And so, he's kind of an old school type robot because he's been left there for several hundred years at this point. And when we get to the coloring phase and the detail phase, he's going to be covered in dirt and rust to kind of show that weathering that would be there if he'd been there as long as he's supposed to have been. Now, I'll kind of speak to that detail a little bit later on and how I kind of got all that in. But for right now, let me get back to the line work here for just a second. So, as I mentioned before, you can start seeing some of the fine line work and putting in the hinges on those fingers because it was important to me that I kind of match up against the actual photographs that I saw of the character, and those hinges are very present. And again, it just speaks to the functionality. You're meant to believe that this robot could literally function in real space, in a real world, in a real three-dimensional environment. And so trying to nail those details as closely as I could to the original drawing became very important to me. And I will say probably right off the bat here, this drawing, at least getting into the end phase of it, was probably one of the longer pieces of work I've ever done. Again, I got obsessed on the detail there, so my normal speed of trying to get something like this done, if I kind of total it all up, is maybe about 6 or 7 hours, but this one took probably about 2 or 3 times that. And I won't lie, it was a labor of love. I didn't mind doing it. I am a lazy artist, I'll admit it freely, but this one was one I just kept coming back to over and over and over again, and really when it was done, I even kept looking at it, searching for more detail to add in, before I finally put the pen down and said, that's it, it's as done as it's ever going to be. So again, hinges in the fingers. We have like the kind of hinge in the wrist joint there. The arm that you can, on the right hand side where you can see that entire arm. Notice it's something of a hydraulic kind of press type thing. So all these things are meant to make sense in physical space. And, the line drawing is going to be really kind of inform how the coloring goes a little bit later on, because the coloring is where we're going to try to pull out the three-dimensionality and try to kind of set him in some sort of physical space. So the lines. Now, the line work itself is really a guideline for me. And in a lot of my work, I've mentioned before that a lot of my influence for my art style comes from comic books. So the line work is absolutely essential to what I do. It's why I like it crisp and clean. But with this Wally character, it was also important because I knew at some point I was going to be trying to go for something of a photorealistic thing. I wanted to try to get that CGI look that was so close, so clear in the movies. And in doing that, that meant that I had to, in some way, shape, and form, try to make the line work disappear a little bit. There are some big bold blacks in there where there's going to be some shadows later on, but a lot of the line work, especially around the hands and areas where there's kind of up towards the top where the light source is going to be hitting really heavy, I try to make those lines very, very thin so that way later I could kind of color them in or at least mask them a little bit and not entirely make them disappear, but at least try to camouflage them a little bit. So again, we'll get into this in the coloring phase a little bit later on, but when you get into the eye portions right there, there's going to be some light bouncing off there, and painting the line work white to kind of match off that bounced light makes that line work almost disappear. But not so much when I get into the shadow areas. Those lines are going to be camouflaged, but still slightly present. It's something that doesn't match exactly to the CGI, but it kind of is an amalgamation. It's the CGI style with a little bit of my style thrown in, just to kind of make it unique in my own. Hopefully that makes sense. All right, now a brief word about this goofy little shape you see up at the top of the page there. It's how I got the tread in on the little kind of tracks that make up his legs and feet. So I drew out the pattern, and then I knew that I had to have this kind of rugged tread kind of sitting on top of it. But as a repeating pattern, it had to be exact. It was easier just to draw it on its own layer and then make a series of copies of it and lay them one at a time on each one of the treads until I got them all in and lined up the way that I liked them. Again, because we're talking about a robot here, the sense of precision was really, really important. So you'll see me kind of repeating something like this over and over again. That cube you just saw was a perfect example. Even though it was sitting in his hand and most of it was hidden, it was really important the perspective on it was absolutely right. And I don't know that I got it exact. I got it pretty close. I could have probably cheated this with some sort of a drawing guide, but again, the lazy artist in me came through and I tried to eyeball it. But I feel like I get away with it because most of it is hidden by the hand, and you just need the hint of what that perspective is. By the way, we'll be talking about that Rubik's Cube a little bit later. I had a lot of fun with that. So now that we got the line work done, let's get into the coloring phase here. The background was kind of an easy thing to approach really quick because I had some reference photographs to go off of, and a lot of them had this similar background where it was some sort of a white sky with a light blue and some stars in there. The background of the mountains was really kind of meant to represent the mountains of trash, and because it's just so far in the background, I opted not to just focus on a ton of detail there. It doesn't really look like a ton of trash. I'll admit it freely. It looks more like snow-capped mountains, but honestly, again, the focus here is on the figures, so the background I admit to laziness on, but I feel like it still looks pretty cool anyway, and Wally's the point anyway, so let's just focus on that. So I laid my flat colors in, and one of the things I think is really interesting here is that when anything metal is involved, I start with a light, I don't know, I might even call it a periwinkle blue. I don't know where I got this from. I've kind of experimented with some metal textures a few times before coming to this Wally piece, and I found out, and almost by accident, that laying in a light blue as your base color is a really great way to start with metal. I can't really figure out how to render a silver or something like that, so you have to almost cheat it with lighting effects and shadows. And so I feel like this blue is a really good mid-tone to start with, and then I'll add in some shadows a little bit later on that'll help darken some areas, add in some lights to throw off some shine to give you that texture that shows you that it's reflective, and then a little bit later on we'll put in the little details to kind of show some scratches and dings because that's very important for this particular character. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. You can start seeing some of that happening right now. All my mid-tones have been laid in, and so I'm starting to kind of work on three different things kind of all at once to make sure I maintain some sort of a balance. So some shadow layers are going in. A little bit later you're going to see some light coming in, but in between I'm starting to put in some weathering and some detail. So again, the idea here is that Wally's been on Earth for about 600-700 years or so, essentially by himself, continually, day by day, performing the same function over and over and over again of cleaning up trash. So his hands are very much used in that effort. They scrape into the ground, they dig in, they grab and get scraped up. And so, over time, you're going to find that there's a lot of scratches and damage done, weathering in essence. And so that had to be represented here. In addition, you can see his chest piece has a lot of dirt on it, some rust. And I'm going to try to enhance this over a series of layers once I get the shadows and light, kind of in an area where I like it. So, how am I doing shadows? How am I doing rust and things like that? Well, really it's just kind of a series of experimentations with several different brushes. And there isn't any magic brush that does rust. I don't have a rust brush or a scratch brush or anything like that. It's really just a matter of going through the pre-prepared brushes that Procreate already provides within the software and finding something that kind of matches up texturally with what I'm looking for. So for instance, if we take the scratches that are across the fingers of his hand there, that's not a fancy scratch brush. It's really just the felt tip marker. The felt tip marker doesn't give you an even line. It looks very scratchy, and so I lowered the opacity a little bit. I shrunk the size down about as small as I could get it, and then just randomly try to throw in these scratched looking marks. A similar effect is done with the rust there that you're starting to see going on the chest. Now it starts out really red. I didn't like it. It started looking like blood too much, so I went in and darkened it up a little bit. But what am I using here? This is actually a charcoal brush. Okay, so I went into the charcoal brushes. I found one that had a really, really rough texture, and I used it at a very, very small brush size to kind of paint in this rough area where I wanted the rust to be. Then I went over it a couple more times and darkened some areas and made the scratches a little bit heavier in some other areas, and that's how we get the rust effect. A similar effect is then put over in another layer where we do something of a dirt layer also. This whole thing is repeated with the Rubik's Cube. So starting off with just a Rubik's Cube in its perfect form, it can't stay like that for long if it's been in a trash pile, so we're scratching up the sticker a little bit. And notice that each of those stickers has kind of two effects happening here. That same charcoal brush was used to paint in something almost like a white grayish thing to kind of see that the color is faded, and then black is taken in underneath of it to show areas where the sticker has just completely been removed or peeled away. Now there's a couple little filters I kind of put off this to try to tie all the colors together, but that's about it. There's really all there is to it. So it wasn't an enormous amount of time and effort, but really the tricks are pretty simple, and I hope you can kind of appreciate what I did here. Now, as I mentioned before, 100th video coming up soon, so don't forget. And if you didn't get a chance to see it, go back and take a look. I'm going to be giving out some free art soon. In the meantime, I hope to see you again. Stop by and watch another video. Don't forget about that subscribe button. And of course, leave a comment. I'd love to hear.